Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the Demons have reclaimed top spot for the 23rd time since the start of 2021. After 3 straight losses, the media, the wider football community, and even some of our own had their pitchforks and torches out. But the D's answered the challenge in style as it cruised to a 64-point victory against the Lions on the big stage. Joining me tonight to dissect the win is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
And good evening to Demonlanders. Well, tonight we'll hopefully find out whether the MFCSS virus has been sufficiently vaccinated against, and can it return?
Oh, it can always return because we thought it was done and dusted after a premiership, but all it took was a couple of losses in a row for it to come raging back. So, this has certainly put a little Band-Aid on my MFCSS, but we'll see. That Band-Aid can be ripped off very quickly. Also joining us tonight to enlighten us on how the Demons were able to overcome the dreaded training loading period is Bimman. Good evening, Bimman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And just on loading, I think, Andy, you probably need a annual inoculation at this point in time of the season. So just ahead of the Queen's birthday next year, can I recommend that you don't watch any footy, or maybe watch Casey smash the Suns or some such, and protect yourself, some sort of prophylactic or inoculation against it, because I'm predicting we will lose 2 or 3 in a row exactly this time next year.
Well, it might need more than just a yearly dose. It might be an every 3 months type of thing, but we'll see. Let's get into our match wrap-up, and I will admit that I was a little bit worried going into this top-of-the-table clash against the Lions on the back of 3 straight losses, and with all the talk on Demonland and on this podcast about us being in the midst of building up on our training loads, which in turn can result in fatigue, as perhaps evidenced in our past few games where we've gone out and had healthy leads only to have been run over and had big scores kicked against us in the last halves. And with all that angst going into this match, as well as my own MFCSS, that is the classic Demons fans' veil of negativity, our first quarter did nothing to instill any confidence in me about our ability to win this clash. I thought we were very lucky that they, and in particular Joe Danaher, was very inaccurate. Otherwise, we would have been further down at quarter time. However, after the first break, I think we got another glimpse of the return to the late 2021 form that we were blessed to witness in our drought-breaking premiership season. Our defensive structures were back. Our defensive rebounding game was back. We were scoring off turnovers again. Our intense pressure was back. And but for our inaccuracy in front of goal, our scoreboard pressure was back. And as well, our forward line was functional pretty much again. And make no mistake, the 64-point margin absolutely flattered the Lions. This was a mauling. It should have been north of an 80 to 90 point drubbing, but more on our inaccuracy a bit later on. And George will delve more into the return of our defensive structure shortly and the follow-on effects when we talk tactics a bit later. And welcome back, Stephen May. Some quick statistics to back up that hearty welcome. Without Stephen May in the team, we averaged 77.5 points against us, and that's 6th in the competition. But with Stephen May in the team, we average 60.6 points against to be number 1 in the comp. And that means on average, teams score 3 goals less against us with Maisie in the side. B-Man, you said you want to say something?
Just that I wonder that whether your MFCSS has actually sort of clouded your watching of the game, because it's a bit of a. I've heard that a few times, and I read a few comments about that on Demonland about our first quarter, but I don't think it really stands up to sort of analysis. I don't think we were actually terrific in that first quarter. So were they. They were at their peak. So, it was a fantastic win, a brilliant win. I'll put a slight asterisk on it because there's no question in my mind whatsoever that they were fatigued. I had my binoculars on them during the three-quarter time on their bench and at the three-quarter time huddle. They were gassed. They were total gassed. But some of our numbers in the first quarter, I thought we were terrific. And I was really... what I was watching for is whether we'd freshened up. And you can't tell in the first 20 minutes of a game because that's when you're least impacted by any extra loading that you might have done or training. And you could see that with the Lions. They were at their best in that period. But from about the 20-minute mark of that quarter, we wrestled the momentum back of that match. Yes, they could have jumped out to a bit of lead and they missed, but so did we. We missed some ones, not least of which Fritter not giving that handball to track for a certain goal. I mean, that was early days, so that's one down there. But that goal that Harms got, for instance, deep in that last quarter, we were with about 90 seconds to go on the clock. We were fighting like caged lions to trap that ball inside our 50 and scrap for that ball that eventually kicked out to Harms. Even Sparrow's mark was incredible. Our intensity was fantastic in that first quarter. So not quite sure where the narrative comes that we sort of are a bit off the boil or they jumped us. To some other numbers that support that is at the end of the first quarter, we led forward half ground ball 17-6. We were forward half contested possessions 26-11. We led inside 50s 12-10 and clearances were split at 7 apiece. Not quite sure what the end of quarter contested possessions numbers were, but the Lions had 31 fewer contested possessions in their first half, which was their worst first half differential since round 5 in 2016, which would suggest that we were ahead or at the very least break even for contested possessions in that first quarter. But to be honest, I'd be really surprised if we weren't pretty well ahead of on the contested possession count at the end of the first quarter, given that number, given that it was 26-11 forward half contested possessions at the end of the first quarter. We smashed them in post-clearance possessions. As I was saying last week, we continue to be number one in that stat all season. So those sorts of numbers don't suggest we lacked any sort of fizz or energy in that first quarter. I thought by the 20-minute mark, the last 10-minute mark, we wrestled that game. We were well on top and we never looked back from there.
George, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just intrigued as to what you guys felt when we were 22 points up in the second quarter.
Well, you know what I felt and what I thought was coming, big man.
20 and why 22 points? Is there some? Is there?
Oh, it's just the previous couple of weeks was around about that point.
20 to 30
the worm
points.
Turned.
Right. Well, no, I was total. I mean, as I said, I was really watching for the last 10 minutes. I said to my friends who I went to the footy with, we'll know in the last 10 minutes of the quarter how we're going to run this game out, because that's when you get fully tested. And all the numbers started swinging our way big time in that last 10 minutes. And I was in the Ponsford stand all of that quarter in that last 10 minutes. A big 3-4 minutes of it was in our forward 50, and we did such a brilliant job of trapping it in. So once we got out to that lead, I had no question we're going to keep pushing away, but partly because, as I said, that's why I put a big asterisk there. I wouldn't be reading too much into Brisbane's form. I certainly wouldn't be writing them off based on that, because they were totally gassed by half time, and you could just look at their, they was at the three-quarter time huddle. I looked at our boys. None of them, not one single player, had their hands on the hips or the knees. I reckon 50% of the Lions players at the three-quarter time huddle were sucking wind still near the end of only a minute or so before they were about to run onto the ground. Hands on hips, hands on knees, that sort of pulling the jumpers down, that stuff. They were shagged. There's no question about it.
Are you saying we eased up during the week before?
Yeah, no question. We freshened up. There's no question.
The boys took 4 days off early on in the week after last week's game, and then would have got back into it
And I suspect they kept on going. Brisbane Lion kept on loading because they've lost 6 of their last 7 finals that they've played. They're in the same position as the Cats were. Exactly the comments that Scott made about, whatever they've done hasn't been good enough at the pointy end of the season. The history has proven that for both the Cats and the Lions. They've got to change something, and they can't go with Melbourne. They cannot go with Melbourne come finals. So I suspect that they continue to keep loading. They've looked ahead. And they flogged them on the track. Some of their numbers were outrageous. So as an example, you can just see in the numbers for us in terms of, you can pick any number of them, but the one that's the most obvious, the sort of bellwether stat for Melbourne in terms of whether our method, as Goody calls it, is working or not, is points from turnover. In those 3 losses, I forget them, I don't have them in hand what the numbers were, but they fell off a cliff. I think we only got in one game 7 points from turnovers, maybe against Sydney. It didn't break double figures barely in the other 2 games.
I think we didn't even get any or against Collingwood.
That's right. We had 77 points from turnovers on the Thursday. That just doesn't happen by magic. But their numbers, as I said, that's the worst first half contested possession differential for 6 years. Their numbers, their stats, all of their key stats completely fell away. Saints are going through the same thing at the moment. And I suspect that that's all about recognition that, they've got to do something to be competitive with Melbourne come finals. We were incredible last year, our ability to run over the top of teams. And it's all about September. It's not about now, particularly for a team like Brisbane, who, as I said, they've been up the pointy end for the last 4 or 5 years, top 4, maybe they've finished the last 3 years and haven't come close to winning a flag in that period. They've got to change something. There's no way that they weren't. So, I'd say definitely we freshened up. I suspect we'll probably do another block of heavy training in the lead up to this game. We've got a good break, and then we'll freshen up again for the Cats game, which we've only got a 5-day break between the Crows game and the Cats on the Thursday night.
I think one of the most telling things out of that Chris Scott post-game interview a week ago was he said it doesn't matter who you play, it's when you play them. And yeah. I think that was certainly the case in this game. Brisbane picked a bad time to be playing against us, and just as equally, we picked a good time to be playing against Brisbane, because they were very, very different. And each club around this period has got different priorities around loading and training and things like that. I don't think Collingwood, for example, is loading at the moment simply because they're trying to get into the finals.
Exactly. Richmond the same.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So that's a really good point. I mean, the other thing about Brisbane is that if they were thinking about the freshness, and I think Freo did the same thing. Freo have dropped off. If you look at the numbers, and if you listen to David King and Montagna and about the numbers they put up, they use the numbers in their core 4 with, what they do without the ball, what they do with the ball, their post-clearance possession, which, by the way, we've never dropped from under 1 in our post-clearance possession all season, despite our dip. Those numbers are put up as a sort of cause, and they're a symptom, and they equally be read as a symptom of fatigue. And Brisbane may have looked at this game and thought, you know what, even if we play our very, very best football, if the Dees play their best football with almost their best 22 on the park at the MCG, at their home ground, we're no better than a 60-40 chance of winning this game, a 40-60 chance of winning this game. So if we are, so why not load up? Take it now. We don't need to beat them now. We need to beat them in September. So if you think there's a good chance you're going to lose the game anyway, why not throw your cards in? So I mean, that would be the big asterisk on our win. It was fantastic. It was a fantastic performance, no question about it. But their fatigue definitely played a factor, whatever the cause was it. But what was interesting, and George will talk about the tactics, but that method, the Melbourne method that Goody's been talking about, when the other teams fatigue like they were, you can really see our game plan because the other team can't control it. And so all of the things that I was talking about last week about our offense being tied to our defense was there writ large on the weekend. I mean, our forward line did bugger all, did it? We had We had 2 goals between our 3 talls. One of them was to Jackson, which was a handball receive 25 metres out from goal. We had 1 mark and goal, which was from Brown. The rest were all flooding forward and getting ahead of the ball, multiple options inside our 50 because of that swarm that I've been talking about.
Well, Brown did kick a couple. He was 1 goal 3 and Fritsch 3 goals 2.
Yeah, not included. And when I meant say the tall, I meant our 3 talls.
Yep.
You know, he's a quasi tall, I guess, but Fritter.
All right, let's follow. Let's keep on with the match wrap-up. Another follow-on effect of having Maisie in the side is the role and form of Jake Lever. And, George, I know you're going to talk about him in your positive, so I hope I'm not stealing your thunder. So I'll just say the 15 intercepts, 8 intercept marks and 100% kicking efficiency, 90% disposal efficiency. So thank you, Stephen May, for releasing the lever. Our midfield was simply purring against the Lions. Pardon that obvious pun. Jack Viney was absolutely sensational. He was his bullocking best, busting through clearances, ferociously tackling, including a tackle on Coleman, in which if you closely look at the footage, you can actually see the moment that Coleman's soul escapes his body. 34 possessions, 19 contested, 10 inside 50s, 8 clearances, 8 score involvements, 7 tackles, 579 metres gained. Probably one of the best games he's played for the club. He was superb. For most of the match, Clayton Oliver looked to be heavily tagged, but that doesn't seem to deter Clary. He still racked up 35 possessions, 21 contested, 12 clearances and 11 score involvements. And it was a nice return to form, or to that great finals form of track with 31 possessions, 9 inside 50s, 8 clearances, 9 score involvements and almost 800 metres gained. And my boy James Jordan continued on in the role in the role of surprise, and I guess not so surprise packet of the year with 24 possessions and 2 goals. And a shout out as well to Harmsy, who was given the role of negating Lockie Neal, whom he not only was able to effectively shut down and restrict to 22 touches, but he's had 14 of his own and he's kicked 2 goals to boot. And I'll talk more about our rucks without Max in my positives for the match, but suffice to say I was impressed with both Luke Jackson stepping up into the role he's been groomed for, and also Sam Wiedemann's role as a backup ruck. More on that later. Our forward line was a bit more functional this week, and most likely due to the return of May and a more settled structure. We had an even contribution from the bigs, mediums and small forwards. Brown 1 goal 3, Fritsch 3 goals 2, Bedford and Cozzy 2 goals apiece, and Spargo and Nibbler a goal apiece. A shout out to Bedford, who really took his opportunity to show his wares. We intentionally went into the game with a shorter up forward line than we normally do, which gave Toby that opportunity, and I thought he did a sensational job twice. He backed himself rather than do what a lot of young players tend to do when they think they have to, or what they think they have to do in terms of doing the team things and maybe quickly giving off a handball, which is often not to the right player or the right spot. Toby's backed himself and he sold some candy. He's kicked a beautiful goal, and a little earlier he's kicked that beautiful check side. And Goody stated that we won't always go small in the forward line, but Toby certainly put his hand up after spending many a game on the Pine as the Medi sub. And you just have to look at Tom Sparrow and I guess Jake Bowie and know that it's all about taking your chances at the right time, and both of those guys have a premiership medal to show for it. Any other general comments about the game, guys, before we go into our tactics talk? George?
Just briefly on Jack Viney, I noticed in this game, probably for the first time, how much more he's using his legs to power out of the situation.
Out of that,
It's something that we've become accustomed to with Petrarca. He was born with that probably. Oliver has developed it to be able to create that initial first metre or two away from the contested situation. But Viney really showed it a lot to great effect in this game, and I think that might be a small change that we're seeing in the way he's playing.
Just a couple of thoughts just picked up on Viney. Again, his kicking's improved so much. Like he doesn't waste the ball. Very rarely sort of those helicopter kicks to sort of nowhere in particular. He was sensational, wasn't he? He was absolutely sensational. There was, again, with the theme that we've talked about, Goody's presses are really enlightening, and, he's really emphasising the Melbourne method, but big emphasis on 2 things in his presser and comments around the game was the sort of focus on role again, is the critical nature of everyone playing their role, but also an emphasis on the team things and celebrating the team efforts. And did you notice when he was down, I thought, oh no, he's done his hammy when he was on his back on the wing. We ended up scoring a goal. I had my binoculars on. I didn't see the goal at all because I had my binoculars worried that Viney had done a hammy. It looked pretty bad. But after that, we'd scored the goal. I think Cozzy scored a pretty easy goal. Is that a third of the team ran across to Viney on the wing and got around Viney, and I wasn't quite sure why. I know it was a great effort on the wing, but there were a number of those things where they were really focused and energised on the team things, and they said afterwards that it was a real focus. Just a couple of other thoughts was one, Tim Watson's son, Job, he's a mangler of the English language, and but when you watch the game live, it doesn't hurt so much when you go to the game. So I found it just funny, not frustrating, when he said Melbourne have got all of the tricks in their tool bags. It was like it was doing my head in, that sort of mixed metaphor. The other thought was for such a beautiful kick, May can butcher the ball, can't he? That missed target where he set up the goal.
Yeah.
Oh, and if Brisbane were up and about, could have brought them back into the game, because they with no momentum. They could barely get the ball inside their 50. And just the other thought I was saying to my mate at the game, how well Gus has been marking the footy this year. Yeah. And then he just kept on racking up marks all game. He was incredible. He's just been phenomenal. When, as we said last week, he must be a chance at All-Australian halfback flank.
I hope so. Let's move on to tactical talk. Tonight, our tactical talk segment, George, you're going to be taking us through the return of our backline structure and their follow-on effects.
Yeah, we've talked about this in the previous weeks, usually in the absence of one player or another, particularly Stephen May over the last couple of weeks, but also people need to remember how Lever was injured earlier on in the season and he wasn't there. I think this is the first time this year that we've had May, Lever, Hibbert and Petty all playing in the same back line. And boy, did it show. It's just the old team getting back together. And particularly Hibbert, I think, just complements that whole structure. The effect of that is suddenly we saw a return to that half-back line wall, where we just kept on intercepting again and again and again. And Brisbane, unfortunately, I was just astounded at how they didn't react to that whatsoever. I was sitting with a couple of people and they kept complaining about Coleman and Berry getting free cheap kicks and possessions in their half-back line and moving the ball up the wing, forgetting that people like Langdon and A and B were already blocking the path. And when eventually they put a kick into their forward line in the hope that someone like Danaher or Hip would mark it, there standing in a wall was Lever and Petty and May and Hibbert. It was just a reinvention of our structures all over again. The other thing that I was really impressed with is looking at Brisbane's previous games. Daniel Rich is a real weapon in that half-back line, particularly his kick-outs. If he can run 10 metres and then kick it 60 metres up the ground, it really launches their attacks in a big, big way. We completely obliterated him in this game. The forwards were obviously instructed, don't let him run, and they were playing much more defensively on him, but in particular, so to deny them that outlet opportunity. So, it was really great to see the structures go back in place, and then further up the ground, you see the effects of those structures in place, the number of turnovers we get, the number of pressure acts, that all comes together because people have got some run in their legs, but also you've got the right people back in that back line again. And what was their final score? How many points? 50-odd points or something like that. That just takes us back to where we were before. With, as Andy said in his opening address, the average is around about 60 points kicked against us, and we were below that level again to try and restore some of our averages. So, the back line coming back. The other really strange thing, given their circumstances, was Brisbane's interchanges. They only had 67 out of a possible 75. they're depending almost entirely on individual games, individual efforts. I don't see the same level of team actions. They keep their stars on the ground longer, but I think they're wearing them out, and as opposed to spreading the load amongst the critical players that they do have in their side. So it's not surprising that they drop off. They're tired, and they're getting even more tired. And if they are loading, why would you certainly only have 67 interchanges for the whole game? It's very strange to me.
It's down back. I could make a case for Salem being about the most underrated footballer in the AFL. Everyone knows he's good, but I don't know that he gets the credit for how good. And it was probably he was quiet in his first couple of weeks, but he was excellent on Thursday, but excellent in his understated way. And I think the flow-on effect of having Salem back is that it frees up Bowie not to be that sort of go-to halfback flanker. We've got Gus down there as well. He can go back to that linchpin role, and then Bowie can be a much more sort of, he can play take us small if he needs to. He can run off. He doesn't have to play that sort of quarterback role that Salem does. He's a really important part of our defensive system, and it's a good point you make about the way they denied Rich. We talked about that on the podcast last year in both of the game that we played them in, whatever it was, during the home and away and in the final. Cozzy in particular, but everyone manning the mark when Rich was in that pocket was really across to make sure that he had to kick wide or he couldn't sort of boom, had no space to run into to release it. And part of that strategy is they let Brisbane have that little dinky kick into the pocket. The other interesting thing, George, I find is the sort of flip to the defensive wall that they set up to stop the team exiting our half of the ground. But from about 20-minute mark of the first quarter, they were brilliant at trapping Brisbane inside the sort of even our third of the ground, and sort of just outside that 50. And you could see Brisbane getting frustrated, sort of trying to switch, but we're just so happy for the opposition to go lateral in our defensive zone. I think at one point we got that. Our first goal was triggered by them coming into the centre and trying to switch when Frida got his hand to it and knocked it down. I'm pretty sure that was the trigger for our first goal. But they just work so well together, don't they? And, even with Mayback, I didn't really notice Petty that much. He did what he needed to do, but as you say, those three talls work so well together. But I think they're complemented by such a good group of halfback flankers as well, and their synergy was terrific. Just another tactical thing for this game I found really interesting, and I hadn't seen anyone sort of note this in the media, but we had a clear focus on forward handballs. And in the first 15, 20 minutes, we missed quite a few of them under the heat that the Lions were bringing. But it was evident. Remember the game last year against Richmond, the Anzac Eve game last year? We had a huge amount of handballs. By the end of the first quarter, or even halfway through the second, I think it was, we were 30 handballs more than them. And so we were clearly trying to chain away from the contest. But a lot of them were long handballs over the top into like forward handball. So it was clearly evident what they were trying to do to chain away from the contest. And Goody said in the game last year against Richmond that maybe they overdid it a little bit. And he said something similar in the presser that, they missed a few and maybe they were a bit too aggressive. But it was clear what they were trying to do. And partly he made the point against Richmond. He didn't make it against Brisbane, but Richmond bring an extra to the contest, and so do Brisbane, to stoppages, I should say. They bring an extra, sometimes two to the stoppage, meaning that if you can get it out the front or away from that stoppage, you can get out into open space, which is what we did really well. And once we started getting on top, if you look back at our goals, a lot of them were triggered by long handballs into space that we ran onto. A couple of beauties from Jackson, actually.
Let's move on to our positives. My positive is our rucks without Max, and we go into this top of the table clash without our 5-time All-Australian Premiership #1 ruckman in Max Gawn, and Max has been a staple of this team for a number of years. So the prospect of games, in particular crucial matches such as this one, is always going to be daunting. But enter our 20-year-old apprentice, Luke Jackson. I thought Luke had a fantastic night in the ruck. Obviously, the game styles between master and apprentice are vastly different. Max with his tap work and marking around the ground, and Luke with his athleticism and his ability to be an extra mid, essentially, once the ball hits the deck. And Luke played an important role in the win, racking up 21 possessions, 10 contested, 18 hit-outs, 4 to advantage, 9 tackles, 6 inside 50s, 3 clearances a goal. And granted, his opponent had 29 hit-outs. He had 12 clearances himself and 23 disposals. But I thought Luke was a bit more damaging in terms of the impact on the scoring. He's had more inside 50s and more score involvement with 5% less time on the ground than his opponent. It was a really good first sort of solo outing for Luke. And I also thought Weed played his role as backup well with 10 hit-ups. 10 hit-outs of his own and 4 to advantage. He seemed to be have a lot more physical presence in this role than we've seen in his forward roles this season. I felt he used his body well. He used his body more. And if Max doesn't return this week, which I don't think he will, I think he'll keep his spot in that role. What did you guys think of our two rucks?
Yeah. I'll start there.
Yes,
Jackson was magnificent. I was really worried about the physical aspect against McInerney, but the athleticism of Jackson enables him, watching his hit-outs, he's able to avoid that body-on-body contact beautifully, and he actually hits the ball backwards over his head a lot, sort of forwards. It's hard to explain. You'd have to look at it in replay to notice it, but it avoids that front-on contact. It's something that I don't think we want to continue for a long period of time with Luke. Let's hope Max gets back soon, because the rucks are just a battering ram against each other in particular, and we don't want to lose Luke's athletic capabilities, but he's fantastic. We did exactly what he was required to do, and that was simply to deny the opposition, create the bring the ball to ground as best he can, but stop the opposition from getting an uncontested hit out or something like that, because we had a superior, the rest of the mids were far superior, and we were able to not lose anything when Weed came into the ruck. He'll be back next week simply because at the moment we have no other option. The concern was for Weed is that's all he brought to the game. I only noticed him in the forward role once or twice. You can't expect to get further games just on a backup ruck experience. He only took 1 mark for the whole game. But he's all we've got at the moment, and he'll be back, but he needs to show a little bit more than even he showed in this game to warrant staying in the side when Max does return.
His contest and effort was good, and as you say, that's exactly what he needed to do. And I thought his aggression at the ball and also the opposition was good as well. And that's really the thing that I'm sure that the coaching staff want to see, and that was behind Goody's comment about playing. Maybe said it a bit inelegantly, but the big boy comment was. I'm pretty sure that Goody didn't mean it like a sledge, even though it came out like one. But yeah, I thought he was good. I thought Jackson was just terrific. Like, those numbers are just brilliant. Is that what was it? 21 possessions, you said, Andy, and I thought it was clever too, the way that you're right, George. It's interesting. He rucks like a basketballer who's knows he's got a leap, who can run at it, the contest, but what was clever tactically was that his ability around the ground really exposed McInerney, I thought. McInerney on paper really should have dominated that game in terms of being able to feed his midfield, but Jackson struggled. Made him struggle when the ball hit the deck. And you got to love Jackson's energy, don't you? He's just an up and about sort of young fella. So no, I agree. They were both terrific, and I'm happy to see Weed in there, and I like him as a ruck. I reckon he's got pretty good ruck craft, and it gets him in the game. You can't. It's a bit like maybe the sort of argument about playing players who are struggling up forward down back because they can run at the ball and see it coming at them. In the ruck, you're in it. You're involved when you're in it. So I thought he was really good. Just a question from in the chat room from Engorged Onion about not the Goodwin's choice not to, and the football department's choice not to bring an extra or match an extra at the clearance, what the purpose around the choice to do so is and what the strategic advantage does it give us. The easy answer is that what it does is it enables our intercept game, because if it's a strategic choice. If you bring an extra up to the contest, that extra can't play in another position, and our extra is our loose defender. So that's why we're able to engineer a loose defender so often. And when they pressure dump kick, as Lazy points up, our intercepts are game is fully built on our ability to pressure up the field and make those kicks difficult. If we can pressure that kick away from a contest, even if they win the contest, we back our Bulls to match it, to halve it, even with a numerical disadvantage. If we don't win it ourselves, we halve it or create another stoppage. If we do lose it, we so often put the person who wins the clearance under a lot of pressure, so they dump kick. And when they do dump kick, they kick to our spare. Our spare, who would otherwise be up at the contest matching theirs, is sitting back on the half-back flank, and we saw it time and time again, didn't we, with the ball getting kicked. We see it all the time. It's basically it's almost the fundamental part, it's the most Melbourne type thing. If you wanted to pick one thing out, it's having our loose goalkeeper defender, that we have that player deep. That's not always the spare, but yeah, we engineer our spare for him to be playing behind the ball, and we take we back our Bulls in to win 3 against 4, sometimes 3 against 5.
George, your positive for this week is Jake Lever.
What more can you say about Jake Lever? There were people worried about his fitness and the like in previous weeks when he was playing without his reliable co-defenders, in some cases all on his own, but he certainly came back to form this week. 15 intercepts. That's just off the board completely. All the things we've been talking about, Bin Man just right there and then, when the kick comes out of the contest, there's Jake Lever taking those intercept marks, and he's doing it on his own as a general rule. Mind you, he also denied the opportunities to Hipwood and Danaher in a big way as a result of that, because he's covering the space as well that those guys need. So 8 marks in the game. What more can you say? Absolutely everything that you wanted from it became the springboard for multiple attacks, and we saw the effects of that down the ground. And again, what we're talking about before in the defensive structures. The system is back together when Jake Lever is taking 15 intercepts during the game.
Yeah, totally. And one of the really interesting things, George, about Lever's game this year is that he's actually he's not floating free as often as he did last year. He is often manning up directly on an opponent. Then he still zones off that player a lot. And he seems to have got more confidence in his marking and his one-on-one, but he seems bigger in the chest as well. So, I wonder whether, I don't know how long it takes to get fully over a knee that he had. He's fully over it now, but his marking is as good as it's been in his whole time at the club. One of the things I really love in being at the ground, as I've spoken about any number of times, I like to sit up at the Ponsford stand, and there was very few people up there, so I could have my very perfect spot, and I'm right behind the goal. And one of the great things about that is that you can obviously watch the whole field, but what you can't see on television with their tight cropping of the angle is players getting ready as the ball's coming towards them and prepared. And one of the things that really jumped out to me watching Lever when he was directly below me is how quickly he reads the ball off the boot. And it's almost in a way sort of his intercept skills is as if he's, he's just waxing off other players and they're doing all the hard work. But it's partly built on how quickly he moves. He's so often on the weekend. He took the first step before the forward to where the ball was going, and really, really clever footballer, a natural footballer, and great to see him in good form. Good get that one, George.
Oh, I had myself on mute. Big man, you wanted to talk about our young guns and a not so young one in Hibberd.
Yeah, I just want to real shout out to our younger players and sort of, Sparrow, Jordan, Cozzy, Jackson, of course, Bedford. That's a good third of the team. We've got Rivers, who hopefully will get back to his best and we'll get another crack at it. Got Chandler pushing up, obviously, but that's a really terrific, group of young players, and it's worth sort of reminding ourselves. Collingwood, everyone loving Collingwood at the moment, but when we played them, we had a younger on average team, less games average in that game. So, it really augurs well for the future to have that those young players pushing up. But I love their energy, and I just think Cozzy is one of the most naturally smart footballers I can ever recall seeing. He's so clever. The way he sort of looks to disrupt contests, he seems like he's got an incredible ability to think not just one step of what's happening, like 2 or 3 steps ahead of what's happening. He's already there. And that goal he got where they slung him around, they basically slung him into the goal. Yeah, that was directly below me, and it was barely believable because he was facing the wrong way at one point. I just love the way he goes about his footy. And I'll put my hand up, and I thought Hibbo was probably on the tail end of his career and would struggle to get into this team, but he was mighty on the weekend. He's been mighty now for the last 2-3 weeks, but he was terrific. He completely and utterly shut out Cameron, and a query I'd have if I was a Lions fan on Cameron is he doesn't offer enough pressure when he's not kicking goals, unlike Cozzy. Like Cozzy can have a hugely influential 5-possession game, whereas you can't quite see Cameron doing that because he doesn't apply the same level of pressure. But I thought Hibbo was awesome, and he seems to be moving super well as well. He seems to be moving as well as he was at any time last year. So, yeah, big shout out to him.
Let's get on to some improvements, and perhaps I'm being pedantic about this, and after all, inaccuracy was a major issue for me last season, and it didn't bite us on the bum then, and throughout the final series we actually had our kicking boots on. We were able to kick straight when it mattered, but having said that, our inaccuracy frustrates me to no end. The only thing that it cost us this week was some percentage, and our percentage is very healthy as it is, and perhaps it also cost us some pride and bragging rights, but that doesn't really amount to anything in the wash-up of the season. But it's just frustrating that this is perhaps one aspect of our game that has seen no improvement. I spoke about it last week in our mid-season review. Go have a listen to it after you listen to this episode. But, inaccuracy, it frustrates me. George, I know it frustrates you too. And as I said, it didn't cost us anything this week except a bit of percentage and bragging rights.
It's something that doesn't seem to go away, but I think particularly in this game, I was going to talk about the forward structures a little bit in any case.
You can go into that now.
Yeah, we only had 3 set shots for the whole game, surprisingly. All our goals, as we mentioned before, came from all the small forwards and mids. So without set shots, your percentage naturally goes down regardless. But that's also a problem in terms of the forward structure going forward. In this game, Fritsch did exactly what Fritsch does every game. He kicked 3 goals. That was fantastic. Only 1, I think, from a set shot. Ben Brown only got 1 from a set shot. But what's going to happen in the next game? Once again, even in this one, in this game, Ben Brown was doubled and double teamed and triple teamed at time. He's the only tool that we had in the forward line. At one point, I noticed we had Brown, we had Cozzy, A and B, and Spargo, Bedford, Harms, and there was someone else. Oh, Fritsch. All of those players, apart from Ben Brown, are under 190 centimetres. Brisbane had Andrews at 202, Adams at 192, and Payne at 197. They had the talls all the time. We went small. It was to our advantage in this game, the way we played. But you're probably going to need an extra tall in there come the finals time. So that's the area that probably needs improvement. I wish Petrarca would pick up on his kicking abilities. He's kicked 921 for the season. I noted, two games ago, he was working prior to the game with Choco Williams and didn't nail a single practice set shot. I don't know that he's improved all that much, so hopefully Choco needs to keep working particularly hard. But again, he's a midfielder, 921. Our other midfielders are probably doing the same sort of thing.
Nicholas' numbers shocking too. It's similar. I think he's 313 or something.
Yeah, I think he's only he got one in this game, didn't he? I think that's his second goal for the season. I think
212 or something. Yeah,
it's just ridiculous. And we're getting the ball, we're getting the shots at goal, and it was particularly evident in this game. But people talk about lowering your eyes. We can lower our eyes all we like, but there's no forwards there to kick them to in the first place. And the people who are kicking them are the ones who are scoring for us. So it's too simplistic to say lower your eyes. Ben Brown's still going to have two people sitting on him.
It's a fair call, I think, George. But it was funny after the game. I had to laugh. I was listening to ABC radio and on my walk back to Flinders Street, and I forget who the commentator was who made this comment. Said, the watch that I have on Melbourne's the forward line. And someone pointed out immediately they just scored 116 points, had 30-odd scoring thing, and they scored, I think we were like 65% inside 50s to score ratio. So, it was a funny night to pick it, but I agree. I think that if we can go up a level, it's going to certainly help. But it goes back to the point we said last week that no matter way you cut it, we're going to miss T-Mac, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Excuse me. Well, big man, you've got TBC here.
I've put it in the chat there. I've got my improvement, and it's not a major one, I guess. Is Fritter? That was a really bad non-handball to track. It was early in the game. It was another one that was right below me. There was no excuse for not giving that, even if sometimes it's 50-50 and you think, well, just kick it yourself. That was not one of those examples here, 100%. Track would have turned and walked into an open goal. He did it a bit later as well, where he took a shot where he dribbled it. I think it may be in the third quarter, where he took a dribble shot from the boundary line where he didn't have a player on, but the play was to kick it back into the corridor. That was like a super low percentage shot. Perhaps it was in the last quarter actually, but I didn't like it. And, it was against both those bits of play against team rules. And I thought Brown also, he burnt Nibbler super bad, where he, instead of easy hand again in the last quarter, instead of an easy handball over the top to Nibbler all by himself, I'm pretty sure it was Nibbler in the kicking to the punt road end, he elected to kick on his left, unbalanced, sort of taking a snap around his body on his left and got nowhere near it. It looked a little bit like a player who's desperate to get some form back himself, Brown, at the expense of giving up a goal. But all three examples I thought weren't great. And really, it's a bit of a cliche, but un-Melbourne, really, I thought. So, I hope that's the last we see of them.
The Fritsch one to Petrarca, he obviously had no awareness of what was behind him. Do you think he had been verbally told, you're hot by...
Who?
Did you think Fritsch had been told by Petrarca?
Fritsch knew he was hot. He had three players bearing down.
Well, then he had zero awareness of it.
No. He knew that he was about to get... Of course he knew. He was in the bloody 2 meters, 5 meters out from his goal. Of course, he's going to be about.
Yeah, but
to
I
be
thought he was a
tackled.
bit slow with it if he was aware that there were people behind him. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, either way, doesn't really matter. He should have handballed to the player.
Of course
who
he
was
should have
right in front
handled
of
it.
him.
It's why I think he had no awareness that he was hot, that a guy was right on his tail.
It was just a classic example of a forward being greedy and wanting to kick the first goal of the game, I reckon. He knew it was hot. There's no, the game had just commenced.
Yeah.
It was within the first 90 seconds of the game, and Trek kept his arms up, hands up for quite a long time.
He didn't say anything.
Like a Madonna for a while.
It was the only way Trek could improve his goal kicking.
Yeah, exactly right. I still wouldn't give him a huge amount of percentage if it was a set shot.
He missed a track on the was it on halftime or 3/4 time?
I think it was that was down to the punt road end again. I'm pretty sure it was the third quarter. Yeah, third quarter. Yeah.
Should have kicked that. He's really got to improve that.
Hit the post though. That was pretty good for him.
Getting closer. Maybe he'll kick one next week.
Well, if I was him, if I was his kicking coach, I'd say do not aim for goal. No matter what you do, just aim anywhere else but between the goals.
Casey, they remained undefeated and retained top spot on the ladder when they defeated the Gold Coast by 76 points. Mitch Brown had 20 disposals, took 9 marks and kicked 6 goals, 6. Jacob Van Rooyen had 12 possessions and kicked 3 goals. Binman or George, who watched this? George?
Yeah.
You did. Which other Demons impressed you at Casey this week?
Oh, it was another interesting game. Casey is still undefeated and another 76-point win. I think they're up to something ridiculous, 170% or something on the ladder, but they're well and truly sitting on top in the VFL ladder. It was interesting watching the game. It was beautiful up in sunny Gold Coast. The ground was a bit strange. It was almost like a circular ground. It seemed,
I believe it's their training, the Gold Coast Suns training ground. It's next to Metro.
They must have moved the cows off it then.
Is it really a paddock? I thought that.
Yeah, it's paddock. That's all that seems to surround the place.
Okay, so it's not it's not their training ground then.
Well, it could be, but anyhow, it was very strange sort of ground to look at. Seemed to be very round. Players that go to the pockets and just keep on going and still not hit the boundary line, but. Anyhow, regardless, Casey certainly adapted to the nice warm weather pretty well, which probably shows how much the environment at Casey reduces the players' ability by running around in the sleet. But it was very pleasant up there for them. It was interesting to see Mac Andrew, who was part of the Melbourne Football Club Academy, playing with Gold Coast. First time I've seen him play, but strangely they played him at full back. The guy's a stick at the moment, and they're playing him at full back.
He needs to put some weight on.
He does, yeah. But I thought, gee, I hope they just don't ruin this kid's career by doing something like this to him. But anyhow, that was by the by. And unfortunately, he played a lot on both Jacob Van Rooyen and Mitch Brown, who both had a day out. Mitch Brown started off kicking 5 points straight, particularly in the first quarter, and then probably had 10 shots at goal by half time, but he'd sort of amended most of it by that stage and finished up with 6 goals for the game off his boot. JVR had first two goals in the first 10 minutes, but then he was primarily used as a backup ruck because Majak Dor, and as we found out today, he's retired as of today because he wasn't available. So JVR spent most of the game actually in the ruck backing up Bell, who is normally the Casey ruck. Tomlinson at the back line was simply a class above everything else. He was a bit like Lever in the seniors. He just took everything and repelled all these attacks. Casey kicked the opening 5 goals, so the game was effectively over in the first quarter. And because Casey was so dominant in that first quarter, it was a bit like watching an NTFL game. There weren't too many tackles being applied by the opposition. Casey just seemed to be running absolutely rampant everywhere with no one stopping them. So at halftime they had a 55-point lead. JVR chopped in chimed in for another goal in the first half, working very hard. Other Melbourne players, Melcham was Melcham, still doesn't seem to put in an awful lot of effort to everything he does. When he gets the ball, he's fine, does some magnificent penetrating kicks, but as far as effort, I'm not sure that it's there that's needed to get himself back into the seniors. Dunstan was just in everything, lots of grunt, but his kicking just keeps on letting him down. So he could provide a lot more options, and he's certainly sitting at the back of the pack in terms of the Melbourne midfield. He's not going to break into that without an injury occurring. Chandler was doing really well. Brown kicked his 6 goals only in the second and third quarter and then completely stopped and disappeared from the game, but he was probably worn out from leather poisoning. We had a 78-point lead at three-quarter time and it finished up 76 points. I think they just sort of quite literally put the cue away and the opposition were completely demoralised. So the last quarter barely made it to the, I think it was about 28 or 29 minutes because nobody really kicked any goals after the three-quarter siren. So, Brown, in fact, had no touches in the final quarter. But, it was a completely dominant performance by Casey, who had it all over quite literally in the first 10 minutes of the first quarter.
It's interesting, George, that they've running JVR in the ruck. They've done that a few times. I wonder whether that's part of his football education is they want to get him in the game, give him other, like I can't see him being a ruckman in like a backup ruck in the seniors. No. Maybe we need them, but there's Bell seems not a bad player actually. I wouldn't he goes all right, but even in the absence of Majak and sort of Bell being the second to Majak, he still doesn't strike me as the player I'd choose to be the backup ruck. Maybe Tomlinson would be, I would have thought would be more the one I'd choose. But, as I say, I wonder if it's part of his development.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I mean, you don't really need to be putting 19-year-olds in against, as the case is often the case, seasoned big ruckman in the VFL, with lots of games under their belt. I suspect it might be more to the point of actually getting miles in the kid's legs.
Get him out of the forward line, get him running around the ground, get his clicks up. It's probably a good point. I mean, he's competitive enough, isn't he, to do it, to scrap for it. Just I didn't watch. I watched about 3-4 minutes of the game, of which about 2 of those minutes were on my telephone, but just on the ground, it was hilarious. It looked like they'd put a camera, like the one camera, because it's the VFL coverage, and it looked like it was miles away from it. But the ground is a big. I think that's the one we've trained on when we go up for our camps up there. I'm pretty sure it's where there's twin grounds. But not only is it circular, it looks almost circular. There's a huge gap between the boundary line and where the fence is. So the ground itself, for that camera work, you couldn't see the boundary line. It looked like, what are they playing on? It's like in the old days when footy first started and they didn't have any point posts, or they just played in an open field. That's what it looked like.
All right, let's move on to the changes for this week. With the success of both Jackson and Weed in the ruck role, I don't think the club is likely to risk bringing Max back this week, perhaps just giving him that extra time to completely heal and probably be ready for the top of the table clash against the Cats if he feels all right. Are we going to let it ride and go into the match against the Crows unchanged, or do you think we will make some changes, Bin Man?
This one's surely the easiest one of the season. I would, if there are any changes, it'll be COVID or an injury that pops up. I mean, it would go against Goody's, whole mantra is no way. What changes would you make for a start? We flogged them. We're brilliant. As even with my comment about having an asterisk on their performance, we were terrific, weren't we? Our attitude was awesome. There wasn't a passenger. Everyone played their role, as Goody said multiple times. The role execution was top notch. If you hear Gus's interview after the game, all he talked about was role execution. Goody's made it clear if players play their role, they stay in the team. So I can't see anyone coming out of that team.
George?
No, likewise. Can't see any changes. We don't need to make any changes, and we still are lacking that ruck and or forward position, so we'll run with what we've got. There's no point in bringing Max back for this game. It's against Adelaide, and with a bit of luck, let's hope, keep the fingers crossed that he's available for the Geelong game.
Yeah, and it does provide the opportunity for Weed to get another game, and he wherever you land on the Weed discussion or Weed v T-Mac's not in the team. We need a fit and firing Weed. He might be the difference. He might be the difference between us winning a flag or not.
Well, let's go into our opposition watch. Last year, we went into our first clash against the Crows at Adelaide Oval undefeated and came home with our tails between our legs. At the time, the Crows had only won 3 games, yet were able to match it with us, winning in controversial circumstances. However, we only had ourselves to blame, coughing up a 16-point lead with about 8 minutes to go. And this year, the Crows are faring about the same as they were last season. They just notched up their 5th win for the year against the lacklustre Kangaroos. They walked away from the match a little banged up with Walker back, McHenry concussion, Fogarty elbow, McAdam ankle and Hamill concussion, listed on the match report as sustaining injuries. I'm not sure how severe any of those are. Walker kicked 6 and Fogarty kicked 4, whilst Laird and Keys racked up over 30 possessions each. Big man, what can we expect from the Crows?
I've not watched a huge amount of the Crows this year, and I watched a little bit of that game, but against the Roos, to be honest, you can't really take anything from that game. Roos are in a world of trouble, though. Like, they just didn't look competitive. If I was a Crows fan, I'd be a little disappointed. I mean, maybe their sort of journey to the top is never, as Dees fans know, it doesn't sort of go in a linear way up, but in some ways I felt like their ball movement was better last year, and maybe they've looked at improving their defensive system in the sort of way that we do, but I feel like they've sort of plateaued a little bit in terms of the way they play. They're a little bit one-dimensional. That they've got a good forward line now with Tex Walker in really good form. They're definitely a contested ball team. They're first in tackles per game, which I found curious. They're 4th in clearances per game, which is super impressive for a team where they are on the ladder. They're ranked 5th in rebound 50s per game. Interesting stat is that probably does flow on from last year. High handball team, so they're 5th in handballs per game. But they, the sort of corollary to that, they're 16th in kicks per game, they're 16th in marks, 14th points per game. So I find it a little bit hard to work out. When you hear about the Melbourne method and the identifiable brand, I felt like it was more identifiable for the Crows last year than it is this year. I'm not quite sure what their sort of one wood is, if to mix my metaphors. I, to be honest, felt that they were more when we were playing them last year. They were more we were more likely to win that game. Lose that game last year than we are this year, because they're not nearly as aggressive with their ball movement as they were last year. Maybe that was evident that the flip side to being aggressive with your ball movement is the good teams pick you off in the corridor and hurt you going back the other way. So maybe they've looked to sort of shore up the defence and be a little bit aggressive, a little bit less aggressive, but they're not getting it inside their 50. They're 15th for inside 50s, so 14th in inside 50. So they're not getting it, unlike Melbourne, who are forward half team, they're not getting it in their 50. So that means they're stuck in between the arcs, between the two 50-metre arcs a lot. I reckon they're just going. I don't know about you guys, how you see the Crows.
Yeah, I watched all of this game, unfortunately, because I'd seen North Melbourne play a couple of weeks ago as well, and they were just as awful. Like you said, you can't take much out of this game because North were in a lot of pain, but they were just awful across the whole ground.
The body language was terrible, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Taron Thomas, I think, 3 possessions or something ridiculous for the game.
His mum died, or his grand. It was ridiculous that he was playing.
And anyhow, when you said you don't know what Adelaide's one wood is, it's Tex Walker. That's it. Let's kick it long to Tex, and if Tex doesn't get it, Fogarty picks up a couple. They kicked 10 out of their 17 goals for the game. So, but the goals that they got were just so ridiculously easy because there was no North defence of any real structure there. It was just an awful game, and it's worthwhile noting that out of Adelaide's last 8 games, their 2 wins have come against West Coast and North. We know where both of those teams are sitting on the ladder. This isn't like you said last year when we ran into Adelaide at this time of the year. They look far superior and capable than what they do this year. They're only using one ruck, which is going to be to our advantage. They're using O'Brien almost exclusively, so that will play into our hands in the absence of Gawn. I don't even know who their backup ruck was, but it's not a serious ruckman by any stretch. O'Brien is down from where he was last year. He's not playing as well, but he's in there. There's a big doubt over Tex in any case, even though he kicked 6 goals. From the commentators, they said they didn't know whether he's going to play because of a calf issue up to 15 minutes before the game. So if that's still around, it's not inconceivable that he may not play the next week, but wait and see on that. Laird was certainly their best mid, but that was it. The rest of their mids are all kids, and unfortunately they're going to come up against the best midfield in the competition this coming week. So I think they're going to really struggle, and as long as we concentrate on playing the way that we did this week, I don't think we'll have any real problems disposing of Adelaide.
The problem for them in terms of their reliance on Fogarty and more so Tex is that in that game against the Roos, I mean, Tex was half of his goal and Fogarty's. They were all one-on-one contests. He won't get any one-on-one contests against Melbourne. Like that won't happen. Not once all day will he get a one-on-one. There will be 2 or 3 players coming across the contest and smashing it, just like we do, as we've talked about how we set up and play against Port. They're probably less reliant on Dixon this year, partly because he's been out for a big chunk of the season. But when your model is built around let's kick it to our big tall forward, the only way you're going to be able to get some goals out of them is if you can isolate them one-on-one, and they've got to move the ball quick to do that in our 3 losses. That's not a good recipe to be able to score enough. As I said, I suspect that I won't be surprised if we come out a little bit flat in this game, that we've put another block of training in and we might be a little bit flat. So I wouldn't be expecting a smashing like we handed out, but I can't see them having enough firepower or enough, their only way really of winning that game is to do what the 3 losses did, is move the ball super, super quick, but they've not been doing that. That's not the way they've been playing. So I don't know that they can suddenly turn that on the way Collingwood and the Swans and Freo did against us.
I'm just having flashbacks to when I travelled to Adelaide last year.
It's time for another inoculation, Andy.
Yeah, I think I do need a home kit.
Before the game this time.
Yeah.
All right, boys. I think we're going to leave it there. We'll be back next week. I'll actually be away for the match, but I will be watching, and we will, providing I've got decent internet access, we will be doing the podcast. Might sound a little bit different, but we will get it done. So we'll be back next week. Let's go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.